This tutorial will guide you through the process of removing the rear and front wheels of your R-Series bike, as well as replacing the tire and tube. If the following process is not within your skill set, we recommend taking the bike to a professional cycle mechanic for proper maintenance. SUPER73 will not be held liable for damages that occur due to improper handling of the bike. You will need the following tools to perform the processes outlined in this video: 3mm Allen wrench, 4mm Allen wrench, 5mm Allen wrench, 8mm Allen wrench, 10mm open wrench, 18mm open wrench, 21mm open wrench, tire levers, zip tie cutters, 3 zip ties, and the keys to your battery. Before performing maintenance on the wheels of your bike, you will need to adjust the position of the display so it does not become damaged while the bike is positioned upside down. Use the 3mm Allen wrench to loosen the clamp bolt, adjust the display, and tighten it back in place. Next, remove the battery and set aside. The next step might require 2 people. To turn the bike upside down, position yourself on the bike, disengage the kickstand, and engage the rear brake. Slowly back up, elevate the bike with the brake engaged, and rotate until it is positioned upside down with the handlebars and frame rested on the ground. Lift the kickstand to give yourself some extra space to work inside the wheel area. To remove the rear wheel, start by cutting the zip ties that fasten the motor cable to the frame and disconnect the motor connection. Next, you will need to remove the rear brake caliper. Use the 5mm Allen wrench to remove the caliper mounting bolts and set the bolts aside. Allow the caliper to sit along the frame and hand tighten the bolts back into the mount for safekeeping. If maintenance requires removing the axle nuts and dropout plate from the wheel, loosen the 18mm and 21mm axle nuts using the appropriate open wrenches, but do not fully remove the nuts at this time. They will be fully removed after the wheel is off the frame. Pull the chain tensioner to relieve chain tension and guide the chain off the crank. Using the 5mm Allen wrench, loosen and remove the chain tensioner bolt from the dropout plate and carefully remove the chain tensioner assembly from the wheel, resting it on the frame of the bike. With the same 5mm Allen wrench, remove the 2 dropout bolts on each side of the wheel and set aside. Ensure that the Allen tool is firmly inserted into the bolt before loosening to prevent stripping on the bolt head. You are now able to slide the wheel out of the frame. You may need to gently tap on the tire to allow the dropouts to slide out of the channels on the frame. Set the wheel aside with the brake rotor facing upwards. If you need to fully remove the axle nuts and dropout plates, you can proceed with doing so at this time. Loosen the dropout clamp bolt with a 4mm Allen wrench, then remove the axle nut and washer. You can now remove the dropout from the axle and set aside. You will repeat this process on the other side as well. If you find that the dropout is not aligned with the flat side of the axle, use the 10mm open wrench on the flat portion of the axle to properly align the dropout with the axle for removal. Once dropouts have been removed, you can loosely put the axle nuts back on to protect the end of the axle threading while the wheel is rested on the ground. Next, you will want to deflate the inner tube. You can use your 5mm Allen wrench to depress the valve and release the air. Once the inner tube is deflated, use the 10mm open wrench to loosen and remove the nut on the valve stem. Push one bead of the tire towards the rim, working your way around the tire to loosen the bead. Repeat the process on the other side of the tire. Take one of your tire levers and engage it under the bead of the tire. Engage your second tire lever under the bead 1 to 2 inches away from the other tire lever. Pull both tire levers towards the spokes to lift the bead off of the rim. Disengage one lever and move it 2 inches down the tire and pull to lift the next section of the bead off the rim. Repeat this process until the bead loosens. Then slide the tire lever along the rim under the bead. Carefully pull the inner tube valve from the valve hole on the rim. Fully remove the inner tube and set aside on a clean, smooth surface. Do not set the inner tube on the floor where it could pick up debris or on any sharp surfaces that could puncture it. Separate the second bead from the rim and then fully remove the tire from the rim. Visually inspect the inside and outside of the tire for any damage such as missing tread, rips, holes, or damage to the bead that prevents the tire from seating properly. Carefully check for any foreign objects that may have embedded into the tire, such as nails, thorns, or broken glass. If any foreign objects are found, carefully remove them with pliers and check the affected area of the tire to see if there is compromisable damage. Damage to the tire can cause the inner tube to be improperly seated and susceptible to damage when in use. If any damage is found, please dispose of the tire and replace it with a new one. With the tire and inner tube still removed from the wheel, visually inspect the rim liner for damage, sharp edges, protruding spokes, and that the liner is evenly set inside the bottom of the rim cavity. If you find any damage to the rim liner, discard and replace it with a new liner. Next, visually inspect the inside of the rim cavity for any sharp edges or damage that could result in damage to the inner tube. If you find there is damage to the rim that compromises its use, please take detailed photos or video and send them via email to customercare@super73.com, and a rider advocate can assist with a proper resolution. To reinstall the tire and inner tube, make note of the side of the tire with the reflective Super 73 logo and orient that side to face the left side of the bike. Install one side of the tire into the rim, carefully guide the inner tube valve back into the wheel, and inflate the tube just enough to hold its shape. Seat the rest of the inner tube inside the tire. Continue with seating the other side of the tire into the rim, and then slowly inflate the inner tube to pressure. You will want to take the tire and bounce it on the ground a couple of times to ensure that it is staying seated properly while you inflate it. We recommend the pressure be set to 25 psi. Check both sides of the tire for proper seating on the rim and that the inner tube is not sticking out. Remove and reinstall the tire if needed to seat properly. If the tire is properly seated, install the valve dust cap on your inner tube valve. If you remove the axle nuts or dropout plates, loosely install them back onto the wheel. Your wheel is now ready to be placed back onto your bike. To reinstall the wheel, first slide the dropout plates back into the frame and then guide the chain back onto the freewheel. Next, install the 2 dropout plate bolts on each side of the wheel, leaving them loose to properly adjust the wheel alignment. Once the wheel is properly aligned, tighten the dropout bolts with a 5mm Allen wrench. Tighten the axle nuts if they were loosened during the removal process. Then install the chain tensioner back onto the dropout and tighten the bolt in place. Once the chain tensioner is tightened, guide the chain back onto the crank. Next, reinstall the brake caliper onto the mount and tighten the bolts with a 5mm Allen wrench. Check that the caliper is properly aligned and adjust if necessary. Reconnect the motor cable and secure it to the frame with zip ties. Be sure to trim the end of the zip ties after fastening. The rear wheel is now installed and ready for use. If you're not performing maintenance on the front wheel, you can now position the bike upright and reposition the display using the 3mm Allen wrench. If you are also performing front wheel maintenance, start by removing the brake caliper from the mount using your 5mm Allen wrench to remove the mounting bolts. Next, loosen the suspension fork axle pinch bolts on each side of the wheel with the same wrench. After loosening the suspension clamp bolts, remove the through axle bolts on each side of the wheel. Once removed, use one hand to hold the wheel in place and with the other hand, guide the through axle out of the wheel hub with the 8mm Allen wrench. You are now able to lift and remove the wheel from the fork. To replace the tire or inner tube, follow the same steps outlined in the rear wheel tube and tire replacement procedure. When the wheel is ready to be installed back onto the fork, set the wheel in place and guide the through axle through the fork stanchion and wheel hub. Tighten the through axle bolts and ensure that the wheel is properly aligned. Proceed with tightening the fork axle pinch bolts from there. After the wheel is installed back in place, reinstall the brake caliper and ensure the caliper is properly aligned. Adjust as necessary. With the wheel and brake caliper reinstalled, you are now ready to position the bike upright and reposition the display using the 3mm Allen wrench. Once the display is back in position, reinstall the battery. You are now ready to ride your bike. If you are having issues with your Super 73 wheels and need support, please contact Super 73 directly by sending an email to customercare@super73.com or calling 814-747-9072 and a rider advocate will be able to assist you.